Everyone for joining us this afternoon for this webinar on the new IUA Claims Agreement Practices. For those that don't know me, I'm Joe Shaw, Director of Claims at the International Underwriting Association, or the IUA. We are the representative body for the London company market, for those that haven't worked with us before. Delighted to be joined today by Kim Darrington, Director of Market Operations and Transformation, also of the IUA. And Andrew Schutte, a partner at Keoghs, who assisted us with the review of the practices. Session is being recorded and we will circulate the slides afterwards, which I'm sure everyone will be pleased with. So they'll be available for you to refer back to later, or if you want to share anything with colleagues. We are going to be aiming to keep this as concise and as clear as possible, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we will come to them at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to cover 4 key questions. Andrew is going to start by looking at what we mean by leaders and followers and how those definitions can mean different things for underwriting and claims. Andrew and I will then look at what has, and just as importantly, what hasn't changed with the new practices. I'll then go through some of the key parts of the practices to discuss how they operate. And finally, Kim's going to cover what this means for claims processing and settlement. So I'll hand over to Andrew to kick off the main part of the presentation.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to provide some context. And I'm going to start by just saying a few words about the MRC and the subscription agreement. So since 2007, London market risks have been placed using a template called the market reform contract. And if you look at section 4 of that template, you're going to find the subscription agreement. And the subscription agreement has got a lot of clauses in it. And there's lots of interesting things that one can say about it and the subscription market generally, which some of you may have found out about through the talk that I often give in the market on this subject. And if you haven't, then feel free to ask me, because I'm always giving it here, there and everywhere in London. Happy to do it for you. But we are going to focus in today on one particular element of the subscription agreement, which obviously is the claims part. And so it's important to make it super clear, thanks, Joe, that when you look at the subscription agreement, there are 2 elements that it deals with. The first is underwriting, so contract changes. Who gets to agree endorsements? And the second, which is our subject today, is claims. And the 2 types of lead and follow arrangements are not exactly the same. They don't necessarily, they don't work in the same way. So if you were an agreement party for contract changes, it doesn't follow that you would necessarily be, for example, an agreement contract for the purposes of claims. They are 2 different things. And it's claims that we're on about today. So with that warning, within the subscription agreement, you have lots of different roles which are referred to. And I'm just going to run through what each of those roles is and what it means. So first of all, at the top of the subscription agreement, you will see the phrase contract leader. And that's what the MRC 3.0 guidance says a contract leader is. It's the overall lead for, well, I was going to say the slip, but we're not meant to use the word slip anymore. If you do the next click, Joe, you'll see we're not supposed to be talking about slip leader, but I keep doing it. I'm sure I'm not alone. But anyway, it's meant to be the contract leader, the overall lead, and that's the first category of participant that you see on the subscription agreement. The second category that you see is important for this context. It's the bureau leader. And you might say, well, what is a bureau? And the answer is that there are 3 bureau, actually. The first is Lloyd's. So Lloyd's syndicates participating on a risk. They'll have a Lloyd's lead, in some circumstances on claims, a Lloyd's second lead. But Lloyd's is the bureau. It's really the framework by which Lloyd's syndicates participate on the risk. And then there are 2 other bureau, and it's those that we're most interested in today because they are both dealt with in the IUA Claims Agreement Practices. So the first bureau is the ILU, that's the Institute of London Underwriters. Someone can use an ILU stamp to participate in a risk. And if that's the case, they're participating via the ILU bureau, and there will be an ILU lead. Exactly how that works, as Joe's going to explain in a minute, is dealt with in clause 2 of the IUA Claims Agreement Practices. And then the third bureau, not in importance, but in order on my slides, is LIRMA. And so if you are an insurer participating using a LIRMA stamp, then you're part of the LIRMA bureau. There will be a LIRMA lead. So 3 bureau in this market, in the London market. And where there are participants from any of those bureau, you're going to see in the subscription agreement, it's going to say bureau leader, and it'll say who the Lloyd's lead, the ILU lead, and or the Lerma lead are. Then the next 2 categories, you can go on to the next one. We don't need to worry about those because they're all to do with contract changes, which is a separate talk for another day. But claims agreement parties, that is something that we're interested in. We normally want to know who the claims agreement parties are, who gets to have a say on the risk, and the IUA Claims Agreement Practices is relevant to help us understand who's got what role, as Joe is going to explain in a minute. And in order to work that out, we need to look at the basis of claims agreement clause we'll come to in a minute. And then the final thing, so we just go back one for a moment, Joe. The final thing, followers, is actually not a word that's ever been used in the subscription agreement, but it's a word used in this market all the time. They're not mentioned, but that's because they're the insurers or reinsurers who are delegating authority to the leads and the agreement parties to do stuff under the subscription agreement. And they're almost always called followers, but it's not a term that you actually see in the agreement itself. So on to the next slide. I just said that we want to be looking at the basis of claims agreement to understand who's got what role when it comes to claims. And this is where the IUA Claims Agreement Practices are incorporated into the document. But let me work through with you what you can see on the screen. So the first question, if you're trying to understand who's going to deal with the claim, is to ask yourself, do we have LMA 9150 in our contract, the SCAP clause? If so, then SCAP will apply to claims that fall within that clause, which is basically low value or lowish value claims and claims that are not controversial in any way. So if we've got LMA 9150 incorporated into the contract and the claim is suitable for being dealt with under SCAP, you're going to have one claims handler dealing with that claim pursuant to the SCAP clause, and they'll do that on behalf of all the bureau. If either that clause doesn't appear at all, or you have a claim that doesn't fall within the 4 corners of SCAP, then we have to move on to these green boxes below. And you can see, by the way, I've snipped the extract from the MRC Basis of Claims Agreement from the template to just show you how this would look in the subscription agreement itself. And so those green boxes explain by reference to actually 2 other documents how this should all work. So the first is the Lloyd's Claims Lead Arrangements. In fact, in the MRC template, it's still referring to the Lloyd's Claims Scheme, which is a little bit out of date, but that will explain how things work if you're a Lloyd's syndicate. So not relevant for this talk, but you've got one document there that's been incorporated into the subscription agreement. The second box, which is important for us, again, incorporates a document into the subscription agreement. And that document is now going to be the 2025 IUA Claims Agreement Practices. And if you are participating by the company's market using either your ILU stamp or a LIRMA stamp, so you're participating through one of those 2 bureau, the IUA Claims Agreement Practices is what explains how it should work. And it is slightly different depending on whether you participate using an ILU stamp or a LIRMA stamp, and Joe's going to explain that in just a moment. And if you were participating in the risk outside of the bureau, then you would go down to this last box, individual reinsurer agreement. So that's the practices of an insurer or reinsurer who elects to agree claims for their own share. And then I think my last slide. So I think it must be well over 10 years since Chris Jones and I were doing a presentation in Balls Brothers, actually under Minster Court, where they've got a very big meeting room. There are at least 150 IUA claims experts in the room. And I said, put your hand up if you've ever read the IUA Claims Agreement Practices. And I was a little shocked when only Chris and I put our hands up. And I think since then, it's been obvious to me that there is potentially a piece of work to make the IUA Claims Agreement Practices, or sometimes referred to as procedures, a bit easier to use, because the 2008 version I would describe as a computer manual, really, more than a set of guidelines. But there was some good stuff in there. And what Joe and Kim asked for my help with in this project was not to change any of that good stuff. So my instructions were leave the substance as it is. So when I looked at the draft, that's what we tried to do. That's what I tried to help with and support with, was just making sure that we hadn't really made any changes, but what we were doing was to try to make that substance more readable, quite easy, to be honest with you, given the old document, more readable and also more certain. And hopefully the new document that's being launched today does those things. And handing back to you now, Joe, I think.
Yes, thank you, Angela. That's a great overview. And yeah, so moving through, I thought it'd be worth looking at exactly what we have published and what's changed, building on what Andrew said there. Firstly, we've got the practices themselves. So these are the IUA Claims Agreement Practices version 2025. Andrew alluded to the various names that the current version, which are technically called the IUA Claims Agreement Procedures, but were not labeled as that as such anywhere. So have been referred to in a variety of different ways, but we've got this new version. It is intending to replace that document as being the effective document outlining claims procedures for ILU and LERMA bureaus, which we will go through. All of the changes that we made in this were in consultation with our members, and ultimately that's where we came to the decision that all we wanted to do was make this readable. As Andrew said, we weren't planning to make any wild changes. And as well as publishing the practices, we have also published a commentary document, which is only a page and a half, but it really just goes through providing an executive summary of what the practices are, provides some additional information on the rationale for producing the practices, which really is, as Andrew said, that we really wanted them to be concise and clear and readable. And again, Andrew's alluded to the basis of claims agreement in the market reform contract, MRC. That template is in the process of being updated to refer to the new practices. So all of these references will be, or our references will be changed. I suppose it's worth noting that if you're intending to follow the IUA claims agreement practices, it does need to be referenced in here. The practices will only apply when stated in the reinsurance contract. And they've also been drafted so that they are subject to any other contractual agreements that you might have in there. Kim's going to touch a little bit on some of the implications from a processing perspective if you decide to deviate from these practices. But the key point I'd make is they do have to be in there. There is no automatic application. So now to look at the contents of the practices in a little bit more detail. Again, as Andrew alluded to earlier, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have heard about the practices or procedures before, have a rough idea of what they do, but haven't really looked at them. So we're going to go through in order. Hopefully, it's a lot simpler in the new document. First thing you'll notice is that the practices are not a long document now. They're 9 pages in total, split into 5 sections, with only really sections 2 and 3 being the key details that you need to look at. For those that did see the previous version, you'd have noticed that it referred to specific classes of business when it was outlining the rules, which didn't really make a lot of sense. So what we've done in the new version is just make it very clear when we're talking about ILU and LERMA bureaus and the rules that apply there. So looking through in order, there's a few things I pick out from the introduction. as it says here, the purpose of the practices is to assist company market claims practitioners in maintaining market-wide standards. They are intended to be an aid. It's not something that's mandatory in any way. It's really up to the carrier whether they want to include them in there. Although, as Kim will come to later, there are many reasons why you would want to do that. They do only outline how claims are handled in relation to ILU and LIRMA risks, because I know sometimes we talk about company markets as a whole. Obviously, there can be companies that are choosing to go via a non-bureau route, in which case these practices are not relevant. And yeah, we talked about ILU and LIRMA. I'm not going to go into detail about the history of ILU and LIRMA. I think Andrew's touched on it a little bit, but there are important reasons as to why you would pick one or the other. So although they were historically linked to certain classes of business, hence the reason the previous procedures were drafted in the way that they were, you can use either one, and you have the option to get either stamp from Velenetic. And another key point, which is often a point of confusion, is that not all company markets are IUA members, and these practices are not linked to IUA membership in any way. And I know I've had a few questions from people who were assuming that once you become an IUA member, you automatically sign up to these practices. That is not the case. It is just the reference in the reinsurance contract. So if you're not an IUA member and you refer to them, you then become subject to them. So looking through the bureaus themselves, going through sections 2 and 3, firstly, we'll cover ILU and look at the key roles and responsibilities. On the contract leader, and this is for both ILU and LIRMA, these practices do not allocate specific roles to the contract leader. Unless there are specific provisions in the reinsurance contract, each bureau should be treated on its own terms. So you'll be going down to the bureau leader, in this case, the ILU bureau leader. The reason why many firms will use ILU is because you do have this distinct bureau leader who is responsible for managing claims, making requests of the broker, and agreeing or disputing claims advices and claim settlements. So if you are the ILU bureau leader, you know that any ILU followers, so specifically within your bureau, are going to be looking to you to perform certain functions on their behalf. And obviously, if you're a broker, there's benefits here in terms of the number of contact points you can agree things on behalf of followers. So this is a question that's come up a few times. ILU Bureau second claim agreement party. Most of the time, the question that comes to me is this a thing that exists? Because some classes of business just do not use it. But this is a role that can be appointed and essentially offers a second pair of eyes to review claims and agree with the leader before any claim settlements. So, going through a bit too fast there. There's a number of reasons for this, and you'll find that the use of this, as I said, varies by class. There are specific provisions, though, for the marine class, for marine reinsurance contracts. There is one very, very minor change in the overall practices that we've made, which states that where there is no LIRMA participant or Lloyd's syndicate on a marine risk, there needs to be an ILU Bureau second claim agreement party. We consulted with our joint marine claims committee on whether we changed that. Before, it did only talk about Lloyd's syndicates, but as the intention was just to have a second pair of eyes, if there wasn't another bureau on there, we included LIRMA participants as well. So a very, very minor change, but essentially keeping the same spirit and intention of that provision. And for ILU bureau followers, they are the next party here. They are following the decisions of the ILU bureau leader or the leader and the second claim agreement party if that is in place, and they will be bound to their decision unless they make an objection during the objection period. All of that is outlined in the practices in terms of the timings for that. So moving now to the LIRMA bureau, where the role of the bureau leader is very different. And I guess it's far more limited in respect of its responsibilities to the followers. As we mentioned earlier, the contract leader, just as with the RU, these practices do not deal with the contract leader. You drop immediately down to the bureau leader to look at who is doing what. And you can see from what's on the screen here that the Lerma bureau leader needs to raise queries and requests with the broker and circulate claims advices to followers. But crucially, the Lerma bureau leader is responsible for responding to claim advices and claim settlements for its own share. And essentially, in terms of dealing with the claim, the Lerma leader is not binding others. Now, this does naturally mean that Lerma bureau followers, or a Lerma bureau follower, has a little bit more to do, and that level of control is actually why many firms will choose to use the Lerma stamp. As a follower, you're providing a response to claim advice or claim settlement, and you can also dispute either directly with the broker if you want to, and almost the inverse of IRU. Crucially, you can respond in respect of your own share if you're a Lerma follower, and any response you make is for your own share. So to refer back to the very start of the presentation, some of the stuff that Andrew was talking about, it is important to understand these distinctions, because if you were to assume that there was an overall lead that can authorize everything, that would not be correct, and you can end up in a position where you're having to deal with a lot of problems later on. And we know that, not least because of the way that this document was drafted before, a lot of confusion can arise unless you're looking down and understand all of the different participants. So that covers the substantive part of the practices, and hopefully everyone will realize that's very, very simple in terms of the layout now. And I guess for some people, all of that will have been stuff you already knew. And actually, you might be thinking the practices are just outlining things you already knew, which is great. The other two sections we've got are definitions, which are unsurprisingly definitions. Any bolded terms within the document are covered within that section. I put a couple of examples on the screen on claim advice and claim settlement, because I referred to them quite a lot throughout this presentation. Last section then is just the disclaimer. A lot of wording in here will be similar to what you see in other voluntary provisions. Again, they will highlight that it is up to an individual firm or the broker's choice if they want to use these practices. That being said, firms do need to understand what it means to not use these practices, and most of the issues are in relation to claim processing and claim settlement, which Kim is going to come on to now.
As soon as she finds the mute button. Right, thanks, Joe. Could you just skip me forwards? So obviously, Andrew and Joe now have taken you through why we carried this review out in the first place, what we're trying to achieve, and some information about how we interacted with our membership in order to do the consultation, etc. And then it's left to me to close, and I hope you're fortunate in that this is quite a brief piece. But the question is, what does this mean for claims processing and settlement, especially as I'm sure a lot of you are probably claims professionals, more claims technician focused. This part may be more of a mystery to you. So Joe, if you could just skip on to the next page. So it's worth asking the question, what does it mean to use an IUA or a Lerma stamp? And in short, both of those stamp types exist in order to direct your claim traffic through to Velenetic in order that your claims agreement and settlements can be processed centrally. So as you'll then be able to figure out, this is a choice that is made at the underwriting stage. By the time the contract is formed, either an ILU or Lerma stamp has been used. And the claims agreement practices, as derived from the claims agreement procedures, were in fact at one point trying to speak both to Velenetic and to the market practitioners at the same time, which was why they were so very difficult to understand. So as part of this review, what we've done is we've stripped out all of the pieces that talked to Velenetic. But it is still incredibly important for you to understand that the instructions to Velenetic remain. And these are the default instructions to Velenetic. So absent any other instructions, as their systems, such as ECF and CLASS, process your claims, they will do so in accordance with the rules set out in these procedures. So the short answer to the question, what does this mean for claims processing, is nothing. Absolutely nothing has changed, because we haven't fundamentally changed the procedures, therefore the processing instructions have not changed either. And so, Joe, if you could just pop me onto the very last page. This is the key point that is something we need to impress on you. Whilst use of these practices is determined by their optional inclusion in the market reform contract, that will not change the instructions to Velenetic. Their omission from these in the MRC will not change the instructions to Velenetic, and your claims will be processed in accordance with these procedures unless Velenetic are otherwise advised. And that is not an insubstantial piece of work. So that is a very key takeaway from this in terms of claims processing. And that is what I needed to impress on you upon today, and I can finish that.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, hopefully this has been a useful run through of the new IUA Claims Agreement Practices. Hopefully we've kept it at a relatively high level, kept it relatively simple, much like the practices themselves. The aim here is to make it as understandable as possible. We are now happy to answer any questions that anyone has. If you want to either put it into the Q&A box, we'll be happy to run through.
I can see there is one question in the Q&A. So what they're saying is that Lerma leads quite often say sequence circulated automatically per ABC's straight through processing rules. Is that to say that ABC is the lead and that it's circulated by ABC as the lead via STP rules? Apologies, I'm not quite sure I understand. Okay, thank you. I think this is something which is going to become more prevalent, certainly as we start looking at the introduction of AI and other automated processing. So it's not something I can give you an answer to now, but it does require some review by the market, I think.
And I think one of the reflections from the review period that we had with this document is there were a lot of market processes that I think have evolved beyond what was in the documents. So our first port here is we needed to make these practices understandable and readable so that people knew whether they were following them or not. Because I think the previous document was complicated, to say the least. So it was actually quite difficult for participants to understand whether they were doing the right thing. So I think, yeah, we are aware in terms of there being some deviations, not necessarily intentionally, but just because we didn't have a document that I think was very, very clear for people to follow. But now you should be able to look at whether you're Lloyd's, non-bureau, or whether you're in ILU, Lerma, company market. There should be some relatively new and clear documentation for any of those routes. Obviously, if you're non-bureau, it's your own decision, but there should be a clear approach that you are able to follow. And hopefully these documents, you can then refer to them if they're not being followed in the correct way and say you have agreed to do this. So that's sort of our starting point. Got a couple more questions going through. So firstly, who appoints / chooses the second ILU bureau leader? Are there set circumstances for this? That is outlined in the full document. I believe it is the leader that would decide that. It doesn't come up very often. I would say in the marine class it was a provision that they were keen on including. Most other classes of business told us that they just didn't use it. And in fact, actually, a lot of other classes of business told us that they didn't know it was an option. So that's probably why you don't see it all that much. But there are clear rules for that outlined in the document.
So
sorry, Kim, do you want to pick a question out?
I was just going to say maybe the SCAP question is for me, unless you want to dive
Yes.
into.
No, that you can take that.
SCAP is determined by inclusion in the contract, not slip. So if the LMA 9150 clause is written into the contract, to which you agree to be bound, then even as a non-bureau participant, you can be part of the SCAP scheme. There are, however, some limitations, and I would draw your attention to the guidance which is on the LMG website, simply because I could be here for quite some time explaining the subtle nuances of that you have to be a registered UK entity, and the various other criteria which go around SCAP. So if you would like to have a conversation about that, then please do email me, and I can happily follow that up in more or in full, or you could have a look on the LMG website. I think that's probably the safest direction I can give you for now.
I'll keep working my way through these questions. Andrew, if there's any that you want to jump in for, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep answering.
You keep going, Joe.
Yeah. In terms of how do these practices interact with the Lloyd's lead claims arrangements, we have engaged with the LMA in terms of telling them that we're doing this, but they are separate rules. So if you are a Lloyd's carrier or a Lloyd's syndicate, you follow the Lloyd's claim lead arrangements. If you're an ILU or LERMA carrier, you would, assuming you've referenced the IUA Claims Agreement Practices, you would follow the document that we've got. So in theory, there is no real interaction between the two. You are just following the rules that you've agreed to follow. That being said, there are a few references between the two documents, and obviously if you've got a mix of Lloyd's carriers and other bureaus, that's when it does become a bit more complicated in terms of you need to know whether you're supposed to speak with the Lloyd's lead, for example, and then you might need to speak with the ILU lead. There might be a LERMA lead on there, and obviously there might be non-bureau. You might have markets outside of London. That's where it can get quite complicated. But in theory, they are separate. There was a quick question there about are the slides and new agreement practices going to be circulated. So many of you will have received the new a circular with the new claims agreement practices directly. They will also be on our website, and I think we will probably circulate them to all attendees from this call along with the slides and in fact a link to the recording. So everyone should have a copy. I know we've got some quite a few non-IUA members on here that might not necessarily have received them directly, but they will be available to everyone. And actually, one of the reasons we were doing this presentation is there's lots of market participants that wouldn't necessarily engage with this that might find this most interesting because they will be relevant, or you at least want to know what rules are supposed to be followed. There's another question on 2.3.3 about the second claim agreement party for ILU. So there is no, that was not linked to a quantum threshold necessarily. That was more about having the second pair of eyes, but that is specific to the marine class. Otherwise, that is optional. And that was due to a consultation we had with marine claim practitioners. And again, us trying to follow what is standard market practice at the moment. But if it's not in the marine class, it is just an option, which is why we don't always see it. And that was something that came up during the conversations we had with members. We've also got a question, are you expecting to publish a number of specific sets of rules for individual classes of business where they want to vary or build upon the cap? We are actually, in a number of classes, looking at good practice for specific markets. So we are looking at specific arrangements where not necessarily we want to mandate anything, but there might be additional measures put in place to assist the claim process, make it simpler, make it so that even when you're not obligated to do something, that it might help out other participants if you are contacting experts, for example, if you have a clear process for that, which is not outlined fully in our practices. So we are definitely doing that. And as I said earlier, this document will be superseded, if you like, by specific provisions that you've got in the contract. So there might be areas where contractually you want to put additional measures in, and they will go above and beyond what we've got in the claims agreement practices. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, Kim. I think that's probably.
No, I think that's a pretty good response, Joe. And I could add fluff, but nothing more substantive.
Right, well, I think that has taken us through all the questions that we've got. So if anyone does have anything else they want to put in the chat now, we've got a bit of time. We were intending to try and get through this as I said, as succinctly as possible. But if that covers all of the questions, then I think we can maybe draw this to a close. If you do have any further questions that we haven't covered here, please feel free to probably contact me or Kim initially, because I'm guessing from a technical perspective, we'll hopefully be able to answer it. If there's any drafting questions, I'm sure Andrew will happily give his views on any questions that we get in. You can find Kim and my contact details on the IUA website, and we'll also circulate those when we send the slides and recording round. But other than that, just a big thank you from me to both Andrew and Kim for your help, not only with this presentation, but with drafting and getting these practices out the door. We have had one final question here, which someone's put in just as I'm wrapping up. And somebody's saying it was very effective.
And I like the one after.
Did you put that in?
It wasn't me. I didn't type it myself.
So how does this apply if Lloyds and RLU are on separate contracts? So Lloyds lead, but on a different slip. Would we need to select a second ILU company? So that is slightly more complicated if you're on separate contracts, and I would suggest that neither the Lloyds claims lead arrangements nor our documents address that in a way that would be as helpful necessarily as people might want, because you are essentially setting that up separately. So
provisions only apply to the contract into which they're written. So without sight of the other contract, you wouldn't even know to address it beyond, would you?
Yeah. But that is a very good question in the sense that this is one of the areas where we've got class-specific good practice, where there might not be a contractual obligation, but if you're aware that there are other parties that you might want to be speaking to or liaising with, that's where we would encourage as much communication as possible to keep it very simple. The difficulty will be, are you aware of everyone that you need to be speaking to? And that is an ongoing problem that you'll hear in the market quite a lot. How do you contact people that you don't know exist? How do you contact parties that you don't know exist? What do you do if they don't want to have as much of a conversation as you want to have? Those are all questions that we do not have answers to on this presentation, but it is certainly something that we are looking at, and I think will be something, as I said, will be covered in some of the class of business good practice documents. But as a first step, we needed clear claims agreement practices, both on the IUA side and on the Lloyds side, to be able to build on with some good practice. So okay, I think we've now got through all the questions. So I'll just say again, thank you very much to Kim and Andrew. Really appreciate all of your help here. Thank you everyone for joining. Really hope it was useful. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us.